thing about being an MP?
I think, like most people who get involved in politics of all sides, it's you want to make a difference. So, in opposition, making a difference is more for me about the enjoyment side is more about you know, the practical support and help I'm able to give people, which is why both here and in the constituency you can see thank you cards on the wall, and being able to change bits of legislation and law. So I've changed things around personal independence payment, universal credit, which I'm quite pleased with. But I think I would enjoy being in government a lot more.
If the Treasury miraculously found a spare £1 billion and it was up to you how to spend it, but you could only spend it on one thing, what would you choose and why?
Well, if it was, again, in these circumstances, it would probably be housing. Housing is far and away the biggest issue that people come to me for help with in different ways: overcrowding, waiting lists, damp repairs issues, you name it, private rented sector, rip-off fees, things like that. So housing would be the number one. That 1 billion would probably just about help build enough social housing to completely reduce Southwark Council's waiting list. So borough-wide, slightly beyond constituency, but there's 10,000 people waiting for a home in Southwark one way or another, and that 1 billion would go a long way to addressing that list.
Given the rapid evolution of technology, it's possible at some time in the future that the electorate might be able to vote directly for bills going through the Houses of Parliament. Would you see that as a good or a bad thing? And in such a scenario, what would you see the role of an MP being?
I'd be nervous of that actually, because of the level of. Now, don't pretend I'm on top of the detail of every single piece of legislation that goes through, if I'm brutally honest. But the idea that people could just vote on a whim on every bill without knowing the full details or reasons it's come forward or anything, I find that a bit. I mean, as a sort of bellwether of opinion, yeah, maybe there's a useful as an indicator, but not in terms of actually having the final say, because then you're having a referendum on every single issue in effect, albeit one that's on sort of a technological basis rather than a physical go and vote in a polling station basis. So my personal experience of referendum recently, I think I'd probably give that one a miss.
Now, do you prefer the carrot or the stick? Is it better to reward people for good behaviour or punish them for bad behaviour? For example, with the use of plastic bags or the consumption of sugary drinks?
I think, sorry to give a politician's answer on that, but I think it does have to be a mixture of both. And often when, I mean, say stick, the carrot is sometimes just avoiding the stick. So I'm really pleased, for example, yesterday Facebook have banned Britain First. I think they're getting ahead of a stick, which is more regulatory involvement if they didn't get their own house in order. So they're doing that in order to avoid a future stick. So even on that, which is a really positive step and something that Anna Turley and quite a few of us on the Labour benches called for after Joe Cox's murder. We said we want Britain First prescribed ideally, but certainly banned from Twitter and Facebook. They've moved, they've done that, but I think they were doing it because of the very significant in the last 2 years political change and move towards regulation. So it is always a mixture of both.
We note the publicity surrounding the use of WhatsApp groups by politicians in Parliament. Do you think the use of WhatsApp groups by MPs is a good or a bad thing for democracy, and why?
I'm not sure why it'd be bad for democracy. I mean, I think it's embarrassing when some of the bits come out of like Philly No Mates was the reference to Philip Hammond last week, wasn't it? Which is, people are sharing quite blunt snippets of thoughts in those groups without necessarily considering that they'll be published. And I certainly wouldn't want everything I've ever shared in a WhatsApp group published. But I don't see they're somehow bad for democracy. They're mostly groups of friends or others who are just trying to communicate better and keep in touch. So most of them are based on sort of support. There's a 2015 intake, so all of those of us who were elected in 2015 just trying to support each other, be it for, private members' bill on a German debate or something, or just turning up to an all-party group on a particular issue that one of us is interested in, wants to have a bigger demonstration of support for. So in general, I think they're a good thing, but people do need to recognise they have a tendency to get leaked or published.
Which MP from another party do you most admire and why?
I think, am I not supposed to say, oh no, they're all terrible or something? We're not allowed to make friends with people in other parties, are we? But that wouldn't be honest if I did that. So, I don't know, on Europe, conscious I've got a European flag right in front of me, I think Ken Clarke has. I mean, I disagree with him on much social policy, and certainly his sort of ministerial background is pretty grim when he was health minister. But on Europe, it is an admirable quality to be able to stand up and speak truth to those around him. And I think he actually speaks for far more Tories than he's given credit by some of his parliamentary colleagues. So they deliberately sit round him, yawn, and pretend he's. He doesn't represent their views, but I think it's actually to his credit that he's willing to stand up, call himself a rebel in effect, for standing up for everything he stood for his entire political life, in the context of people who are being quite, easy to trash his reputation, and with the poisonous media context of traitors and enemies of the people kind of language. He's still there saying to people that they're in la la land for pretending that everyone's going to have a unicorn after we leave the European Union. I kind of like that ability to stand up for what you believe, despite your colleagues going off on a different tangent.